Our Orthodox siblings in the Christian faith are celebrating Easter today. The world's probably much more conscious of that time shift this year than it has been in many, many other years. But our Greek and Ukrainian and Slavic and Russian Christians Easter is today. And I have never really learned how that goes out of sync, usually 1 week from Western Christianity, but it does. I understand Western Christianity, it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox, but like nobody really needs to know that. But I think it is so helpful for us right now to be focused on their celebration of Easter. And in fact, a lot of what we're doing in liturgy, in the worship style in this season of Easter, comes to us from Orthodox and Eastern Christianity, where you walk into those sanctuaries and you don't get pews. No. You stand for the entire 3-hour service and, incense and chanting and all kinds of stuff. But the tradition of reading for the hearing of the gospel, the old tradition is, Jesus in those early chapters sat down and read the scriptures and taught while everyone else was standing and listening. And it's kind of like at attention. And of course, if you go to a rock concert today, you don't want to be sitting down. You want to be up front and you want to be standing and you want to be shouting and you want to be all part of it. And it's amazing. We get really staid in our old funky white churches, but here we are. So certainly for all of you, though, if it is uncomfortable or challenging in some other way, please remain seated, but we are introducing that. Lent was more of a period of somber meditation and prayer and preparation and reflection. And now this is more of a period of, okay, let's go. Let's go and do something. And then always the Sunday after Easter in the lectionary, we get to hear the story about Thomas. Now, what do you know of the name of Thomas? Okay, did you hear that word in Scripture? No, who is he called? He was called the twin. Apparently there's another one. I have no idea who that was, but called the twin. And Jesus doesn't even talk to him about doubting, but talks to him about not believing. It's critical in challenging times to dream, to imagine, to hope, to envision, and to keep the dream alive. Proof positive is what we're looking for. Proof positive is what Thomas asked for. When Jesus appeared to Thomas, he wasn't rebuked or condemned for his questioning, but he was asked, what do you need to see? What do you need to feel? What do you need to know? What do you need to experience to realize I'm still alive? I'm still here. What is the proof positive that you and I need to face our tomorrows to know that God is still alive? And what proof do we have and what proof can we offer? It's critical to keep a dream alive. True believers need to know that God is still working. God is still speaking. God is still in our world. That God is alive in our world and that God is sovereign over the world, especially when it looks like the world is falling apart in chaos, personally, familially, or worldwide. It's critical to our mental and our emotional well-being to have proof positive that God still lives. Without that, we are plunged into despair. We are like Tyler in our story and only see what's gone wrong and only see what has misstepped and mishappened. To go on, to go forward, to keep living, it's essential to have a reality of faith and faith in God, faith in ourselves, and faith in one another. I was reading Brian Blunt's commentary, the African-American commentary on the New Testament. He's an African-American writer, and he talks, especially talking about the story of the Revelation. He says that enslaved Africans in the United States took the white slave master's Bible and used its imagery and message to witness to the subversive truth that God, not the slave master, not the slave owner, was actually the one in charge. They sang about God's coming judgment and glory in the hope that it would encourage contemporary resistance and endurance. You take those old spirituals, and they are insane stories when you think of them being sung by people working in chains, people working under whips, people being lynched, people being shot after and chased. And yet they sang these crazy stories from John's revelation. The revelation of Jesus Christ. All right, here's the pastor's pet peeve. The book is called The Revelation. There's no S on the end of that, okay? It's one revelation of Jesus. Not of catastrophes, not of all kinds of other things. Apocalypse means revealing, pulling back the curtain and seeing into an impossible, unknown future. John was old. John was an early follower of Jesus. John was arrested by the empire and thrown onto a rock island in the middle of the Aegean Sea to live out the rest of his life until he was finally executed. And in the middle of that, I don't know what he was drinking, smoking, or eating. I have no idea. But he had these crazy dreams and wrote them down one after another as they came to him. A vision of not the emperor in charge, not the empire authorities, not the political system of the day, not everything else that was going wrong, but of God actually working in the world. And the passage that Kathy read for us today about Jesus walking among the seven spirits, there's that wonderful number, are the seven churches of Asia Minor. There were 7 little towns in Turkey. They were thriving, beginning communities of Christians who were under such great persecution and oppression, such terrible lives they were living because of their faith. And the vision John had was that they're not alone, but that the living Christ actually walks with them and among them. It was a vision of hope. The other thing that Brian Blount in his commentary on the Revelation does is compare the book of the Revelation to the movie Pulp Fiction. I don't know if anybody's seen Tarantino's movie with Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta, but if you try to watch it, it like keeps undoing itself. 7 different vignettes are told, and they go back and forth and start from one perspective and then go to another perspective and then come to the first perspective and then go back. And it's just, you're trying to find a timeline and it doesn't work. It's all an emotional story about angst and decisions and misadventures and terror. And I get it. See, it's not the straight line sequence that we want. We want that in life all the time. We want to know that if I start here, and if I do these things, and if I follow the straight and narrow, it's going to work out just fine. But we know as we live it, life does not work that way at all. It goes in all kinds of misdirections, and we are never perfect people, but we make decisions and choices which have impacts on our lives and the lives of everyone around us, and we can never pull out a single one of those blocks of the Jenga tower that we're building in life without it affecting all of them. So what we do is we believe in a God of redemption and transformation who takes all of those missteps and good steps and works them together into something amazing, to say that God is still sovereign over our lives and in the world. And for all the errors or terrors that we've made or endured, God is still working in our lives. The movie and the story of the Revelation and our lives is an episodic narrative with circular events adding the beginning and the end, all coming true with one point. The gospel and the revelation is a circular narrative. It all keeps coming back to the same point. God is in charge of your life and my life. God is working. And our challenge, like Thomas, is to find evidence of that, find proof positive that God is working in the world. Today, we're talking a lot these days about injustice in the criminal justice program. I was blessed to be part of a congregation that, before I had arrived, had started on a restorative justice ministry. It was a bunch of white people up in the countryside, up in the mountains, who were concerned, and the women in that church, in their group, became pen pals with an incarcerated African-American woman in New York City. And they started writing to her. Could they change the entire criminal justice system or the corrections system? No, but they could do this one thing. And they started writing to her, and they became friends. Eventually, they actually made some visits and brought her some needed things. She was getting near the end of her sentence, and parole was coming up, and she was like, I really don't want to go back home. The situation is bad. It will go from bad to worse, and if I go back there, I'll just get into the same trouble I was in before. So, unprecedentedly, the church and others petitioned the courts that she could be returned not to her home jurisdiction, but to somewhere else upstate, if there was a sponsoring agency, if there was a home, if there was a job, if there was support. The women in that church dug down deep. They talked to everybody else. One of the families said, we have an extra room, the kids have moved out. She moved from downstate to upstate, started a job in a factory nearby, became a worshiping part of that congregation. First, she was the one kind of, well, organist, but the one kind of black face in that whole big white congregation. Did the world totally change? Did the criminal justice system be completely transformed? Did all of those who were improperly incarcerated be let go? No. But was there proof positive that God was alive? That people could be transformed by the overreaching power of faith and hope and love? Yes. And that so is the way it is. That's what we testify to. We see that one place where God is active in the world, and we celebrate it and magnify it. I hadn't planned on sharing this story, but as we drove over, we were listening to the radio, and it is Easter Sunday, or was Easter Sunday in the Ukraine. And the radio interviewer and reporter was visiting in Kyiv to a pastry shop sometime at the end of Holy Week, this last week for them. And near the front, near the fighting. And this woman, many of the women had left, she stayed to make the traditional Easter cakes for Easter Sunday. They were being decorated, of course, in blue and yellow for Ukraine. They were being sent by some kind of miraculous carrier to the soldiers on the front, so that they might have some rejoicing in the midst of their desperate need to protect their homeland. And one would wonder, why bother? The power that's coming at them is huge. It's one of the few nuclear powers in the world. It has more money and more tanks and more soldiers. It's been shown to create hard atrocities. Why even bother? And of course, what happened next was the baker made the reporter eat the cake. Then after the cake was eaten, eat the soup, and then eat the rest of it, and had sat down for an entire Easter meal. And in the middle of war, hospitality, Christian hospitality, was shown. Why? Because we have to find evidence that God is alive. We have to find evidence that there is something we can do in the midst of chaos that testifies to our faith. You and I must find, like Thomas, evidence that Christ is still alive in our lives and in our world, and share that. There are marginalized people of color and of age and with illness and with disease, people of color, people of queer identity, people who are trying to know how to live, people who are getting older, and people who are young and who are ignored. But we have the faith that the end of the story is that God is sovereign. James Joyce writes that mistakes are portals of discovery. Mistakes are portals of discovery. So do we do it all perfectly? Do we always have faith? Do we always have complete resolve? No, we waver. But in that wavering, as we re-examine ourselves and the situation, we find new reason and ways of faith. We find that maybe there's a hero in our world that encourages us and gives us faith. People in that church of long ago had a passion for justice, and they started putting it into action. It started just with a letter, just the friendship of a pen pal. They had no idea where it would lead. You have a passion for life and hope and children and being and family and truth and love. It brings you a passion of talent, of energy, of creativity. Go where it leads you. In that passion, find evidence that God is alive in your world. And be a bright hope and be a hero to someone who needs to be lifted up. You are the proof positive that God is alive still today, that Jesus lives, that we have a resurrection story, and we celebrate it as we join together in a life of faith, hope, and love. You're my heroes. Oh my goodness, yes. You are my heroes. And for that, I am eternally thankful. Amen.